Alright, in the last video we went ahead and we set up an application with the Angular CLI and we did an ng-serve, so we're viewing it on port 4200. Now what I'm going to do is open the application in Visual Studio Code so we can get a better look at the file structure. So if we go over to this file icon, you can click that and then click Open Folder. And we want to navigate to wherever you installed your application. Mine is going to be on, let's see, it's going to be in my users folder and in a folder called projects and then Angular apps. So I'm going to click select folder and then we can get a better look at the file structure. Alright, so let's close this up. Alright, so these files here are all in the root directory, and that's what we're going to look at first. So most of this stuff you don't really need to mess with. It's configurations, testing configuration. You see Karma is actually a testing framework that ships with Angular CLI, and we're not going to get into testing. That's beyond the scope of this video, of this course. There's also the TypeScript config file, so you can define things like what output you want TypeScript to compile to, which in this case is ES5 for maximum browser compatibility, things like directories and so on, but you're not going to really need to mess with any of that stuff. TSLint also has to do with TypeScript, but we're not going to need to mess with that. The most important thing in this root directory is going to be your package.json. Okay, this is the most important thing that you should really understand. So if you've worked with Node.js at all in the past, then you probably know what this is. It's a manifest file that has things like the application name, the version, it has all the dependencies that the application needs, things like that. So you see name, version, the license, which is MIT by default, and then we have scripts. So scripts are basically shortcuts that we can run to do certain things. For instance, ng-serve. This is the command that we run to start our application, and you saw that. So a script that we have here is start. So we could run npm start, and that's going to actually run ng-serve. So you could basically run either one. If we were to stop our application with Control-C and do an npm start instead of ng-serve, it's going to do the same exact thing. It's basically a shortcut. Alright, you'll see it's going to run that. It's going to start the server up. Alright, now build, npm build or ng build, this is going to build out your application so that you can deploy it. Okay, it's going to compile a bunch of static assets and you can just upload it to your server, which is a really nice feature of Angular CLI. We also can do testing. E2E is for end-to-end testing. We're not going to need to do any of that. Now, dependencies, you can see there's a lot of these at Angular. These are the Angular libraries or packages. So Angular is composed of a bunch of different packages. So we have animations, common, compiler, core. A lot of the stuff comes from the core. Forms for the forms module, the HTTP module, platform browser. This has to do with bootstrapping the app, and then the router. So notice that these are all version 4.0.0. Now remember back in the section where I talked about the versions, the reason there was no Angular 3 is because this router version was off from the rest of these, and that would have just been a nightmare for the developers. So that's why they decided to move right to Angular 4 so that all of these matched. Alright, we also have things like RxJS, which is reactive extensions. That gives us the capability to use observables and work with data streams. Dev dependencies are dependencies that are only needed for development. Okay, when you deploy your application, you're not going to need this stuff. It's just for development. So all the testing, Jasmine, Karma, this is all testing stuff. TypeScript, what else? The CLI itself, the CLI compiler. This is all development dependencies. Alright, so this is just what Angular and the Angular CLI is composed of. Alright, so let's go ahead and close that, and then let's look in source. Okay, these two folders here aren't really important. This is for end-to-end testing, and then node modules, this is just where all the dependencies live. You're not going to need to touch any of that stuff. Okay, the source folder is where all the good stuff is. So we have our index.html file. So this is the core file that's loaded into the browser. You can see this is where the doc type is, the HTML head and body tags, and then this app root right here is actually a custom directive where our Angular application is inserted. In addition to that, we have our main.ts file, which takes care of bootstrapping the app module. So you can see here, it says bootstrap module, and then we're passing in app module, which comes from the app.module.ts file. Now, you'll see this .ts, you'll see this everywhere, including in our components. That's a TypeScript file. Basically, the Angular CLI includes the TypeScript compiler that's going to look at those TS files and then compile them into regular JavaScript files or JS files. And then that's what the browser is going to load, because the browser cannot load TS files natively. It has to be compiled down. So if we look at, let's see, tsconfig app.json, everything is going to get compiled out to this out tsc/app. All right, and that's where the browser is going to look to load all of our JavaScript. And you can see down here it's going to exclude things like test.ts because that doesn't need to get compiled. That has to do with testing and development, and it's not something we need to actually be compiled. All right, now if we look in the app folder, this is where all of our components go, all of our services, our pipes, anything that has to do with our Angular application. All right, and this is where you'll see the app.module.ts file. So I'm not going to go into exactly what this is yet because I dedicated a section for that. I want you guys to kind of understand exactly what's going on here, but this isn't the video for that. I just want to go over the files, not the actual code yet. Okay, so that's the app.module file. Then we have our main app.component.ts file. Okay, notice all of these have the TS extension because these are TypeScript files that will later on be compiled into JavaScript and then loaded into the browser. So this is the main app component. We're going to go over all the structure of a component later on. And then we also have an app component HTML file. You'll see that it's actually being loaded right here. So we can actually include the template here, or we can include a separate file like what's going on here. And if we look at that app component HTML file, that's what we're actually seeing in the browser. Okay, remember it had the logo, it had the links at the bottom. This is what we're seeing. All right, and then components can also have their own CSS file, which in this case is blank. Now, when we create our own components, we'll want to put them in a subfolder called components and then basically nest them inside of the main app component. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that later on. But just know that this source app folder, this is the meat of our application. That's the stuff that's actually going to be compiled into our production code. We also have an assets folder for static assets like images and things like that. And then environments, so we can set certain variables for production and then certain variables for a dev environment or something like that. All right, and then let's see, I think that's it. Oh, the Angular CLI.json file. This is the configuration file for the CLI. If you're not using the CLI, you won't have this file, as you'll see when we get into the quick start. But this is where you can set like your output directory. When you build out your static assets, it'll go in a dist folder, but you can change this to whatever you want. You'll see the root folder is the source folder, so that's where it looks. It's testing, things like that. You can also load scripts and style sheets here as well. You can see it's loading styles.css. So that's what that is. Now, I hope all this stuff didn't overwhelm you. Just know that most of the stuff you're looking at has to do with the CLI and compiling our TypeScript, things like that. The most important thing, as I already said, is this app folder. Okay, that's where everything is going to live. That's where all of our code's going to go. So try not to get overwhelmed with the rest of this stuff. So now that we looked at the file structure of an Angular application, in the next video I'm going to show you the option of installing Angular using the Quick Start seed as opposed to the CLI.